one of the reasons for this presentation, I suppose, is to try and look at the effects of the recession per se. So in terms of an agenda, what I'd like to do is just run through what we're now left with, what has actually changed in terms of buying habits, in terms of people's expectations, and also, I suppose, what we can do about it to try and make a difference moving forwards. Now, I guess the first thing to think about is why people buy in the first place. And I guess if you look at buying habits, people generally buy for three main reasons, predominantly for profit. They'll buy something because it's a good deal or it's value for money. The second is pride, prestige, kudos. Sort of person that will buy a mobile phone, not because they intend using it, but because it looks good on the golf club bar. And the third type is the fear buyer. Now, these people don't particularly want to buy, but they're scared of what will happen if they don't. Right? And when you look at the sort of the normal picture of why people buy, you end up with something that resembles this. So the three circles overlap, and the concept behind it is that the profit buyer will buy something because it's a good deal, because it's value for money. The prestige buyer, it's all about image and reputation and kudos. And remember, the fear buyer is terrified of making the wrong decision, so rather than take the wrong decision, they'd rather not make the decision at all. So imagine somebody was buying a sofa or a settee. The profit buyer would drag you back and say, darling, come and have a look at my sofa. And the fact is, you know, they saved a fortune, and that's what really rings their bell. Yeah? Not because they like it, not because it fits in with the colour scheme, but they saved a fortune, and that's really what turns them on. The pride or the prestige buyer will drag you back and say, darling, have a look at my Hugo Boss Armani, isn't it lovely? You know, the fact it says uncomfortable as a mortuary slab is irrelevant. It's got the right label, and therefore to them it's perfect. The fear buyer probably wouldn't choose to go and buy a sofa, but if they invited you back and said sit on the floor, you probably wouldn't come. So reluctantly, they'll buy their sofa. Right? And do remember that they overlap. So the idea being is that depending upon where you are, you will tend to buy a different thing. There is arguably a fourth motive, which is comfort. Sometimes people buy something because it's comfortable, right? Irrespective of those motives. Now, I guess if you have to try and look at what happens in a recession, this is what happens to those circles in a recession. Right? They all squish together. So ultimately, the overall motive that people tend to see is the cost one. And so if you look at it as a sort of continuum, with a recession at that end, with the norm in the middle, and the sort of boom like we had in the 80s to the right, that's really what tends to happen. Now, I suppose the pendulum swing from a recession to a boom is probably 7 to 9 years. Not being an economist, but roughly every 7 to 9 years, that pendulum changes direction. Now, according to the economist Roger Martin Fagg, we are currently enjoying a sort of recovery from the recession, notwithstanding the fact it was based on one quarter, which included Christmas. But the point is the press are now talking about it as a good thing. We're out of recession, and actually the press are responsible for quite a lot of the momentum. So the fact they're talking about it as a positive is a good thing. The downside is that they reckon that the current sort of upturn will probably last between 6 to 9 months. Then we'll have another little dip, and then we'll start that slow, gradual recovery program afterwards. Now, from our point of view, folks, I guess the biggest thing is that people who would traditionally buy, let's say, for prestige, are suddenly having to consider money. I've actually had like an email last week from a client who apologized that she had to ask me for a discount. And so it doesn't sit well with prestige buyers. Right? It is, of course, open season for the profit buyers. They just think it's fantastic because they've got used to asking for a discount and in many cases getting them. So let's see what we're actually talking about in terms of where we are now. Well, I guess if we take these in turn, the first thing is this wretched discount word. I think people are quite used to getting a discount. I've actually seen printed purchase order numbers that have got at the bottom, did you ask for a discount, yes or no, and if so, how much did you get? So it's almost becoming the normal expectation. I think as a nation, we're not particularly brilliant at asking for discounts. You know, we're one of the few countries in the world where we will pay the price that's on the ticket. And it's actually sometimes you're a bit staggered by it. This morning I stopped off for a cup of coffee and an orange juice. It wasn't from a machine, it was just coffee and an orange juice, a little bottle like that. And I paid £5 for it. And I thought, surely something here is wrong. And so I think the idea of asking for a discount has become suddenly much more attractive, especially when you're paying that sort of money for coffee and oranges. The second thing about it, folks, I guess, is that people are having to question more. You know, if they are spending, it's now, do we need to spend this? What will it do for us? And so they have to justify any investment. It's a bit like, I suppose, coming to an exhibition like this. You know, years ago, some people, not many, some would come just for a good day out and an excuse to get out of the office, and vaguely called it networking. Nowadays, you've got to have some business cards. You can say, look, I actually did do something. Yeah? So there is this need that if people are going to spend money with you, they're going to be asking for some sort of return on that investment, some sort of justification, some sort of concrete evidence that it's worked. The other consequence I think we'll see is the fact that people will take longer to make a decision, and when they do make a decision, they'll pay at the 11th hour, and sometimes beyond the 11th hour. Right? I think one of the big problems we have here is that you look at something like advertising or even an exhibition, you'll find that the exhibitor doesn't want to commit to their stand until weeks before the event takes place. The organizer who runs the show doesn't want to commit to Earl's Court until weeks before. But of course, everybody's putting everybody else under pressure to make that early commitment. So again, we've got to think about what's it going to take to give people an incentive to come in early rather than stressing the consequences of what will happen if they wait until later. And finally, I guess, competition. Now, you know, the competition situation is quite good because the recession has killed off some pretty poor companies. It's killed off some good ones as well, unfortunately. But the point is, the competition will show that the ones that survive are stronger, therefore arguably better, and therefore you are now competing against stronger competition. Right? One of the interesting facts was the Chartered Institute of Marketing did some research recently into the number of cold calls that people get. And I suppose the interesting fact number one is that the UK is predominantly made of SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises. I think the figure is somewhere between 82 and 85% are SMEs. So the majority of UK businesses are SMEs. The research shows that the average number of cold calls per day, in other words, a cold call is defined as an unsolicited inbound phone call. And they reckon that the average SME is receiving between 50 and 55 cold calls per day. So suddenly you imagine you're a big, sexy name, you're going to be on everyone's prospect list. And chances are you'll receive an awful lot more than 55 cold calls per day. So the consequence of this is that if you do make a phone call, you risk being customer number 48 that day, or 49, or 50, or 51. And therefore you need to do something to separate yourself from the run-of-the-mill. Now I guess you think about your opening comment, you know, if you're making a cold call, think about how you're going to open it, what's going to set you apart from the others. And therefore I think you need to understand the environment in which we're in. And arguably, people have said that we passed through the industrial age, we went through the technological age, we crunched through the information age and the communication age, and arguably, at the moment, we're in the age of immediacy. Right? Thanks to all these things like Twitter, you know, it's just everything has to happen yesterday. So what we need to do is to understand that this is not, oh my God, I didn't see this coming. You know, we can predict that this is the situation, and therefore we can influence it to our advantage. And I guess this is really why what we used to do no longer works, because we need to be a bit sharper. We're facing competition, we're facing people asking for discounts, late bookings, and so on. So what we need to do is arguably predict the situation and then influence it so it goes the way we want it to.